Hello, welcome back to Black Doctors Podcast. I am Steven, your host. It's been a good couple of weeks. Had some really good episodes, being Dr. Bernice Fulcom had over the last 2 weeks talking about her life as an emergency medicine resident and now EMS fellow. She talked about the MPP that she earned, what that means. And before that, I think it was the episode with Dr. Nate Jones, Dr. Bianca Bush, talking about anxiety. Always good to hear from Dr. Bush, the college psychiatrist. This week, it's just me and you. Been thinking about, what I can share. I think right now we are in the middle of residency application season. Folks have submitted their ERAS. They're accumulating, collecting interviews. It's a very stressful time for fourth year medical students. Heart goes out to you. I remember those days. It was not fun. You will get through it, whether you're a person of faith or believe in serendipity or just luck. You've done the work to get this far in your career, and you've got to, trust that you're going to see it through. I know the interviews may not be as plentiful as you would like. Just know, these programs are going to get through interviewing people. There's going to be some more things that open up. There's going to be some more options. And I do truly believe you're going to end up in the correct program for you. If you are in the match process and you're having trouble, please, now is the time to reach out, to find mentors, to ask people for advice, look over your application. If it's time to, apply to some other safety programs or a different specialty, now is the time to really dig in deep and get that advice or that mentorship. So things have changed a lot since I was applying to residency. I submitted my application back in fall of 2013 because I matched and finished residency in 2014. So obviously everything was in person. Then it was pre-COVID pandemic. And let me tell you, that was a struggle. I feel so old now because I can talk about like back in my day. But back in my day, and for a lot of other physicians that are the same age as me, or I guess the pre-COVID generation, we had to do all of our interviews in person. So I figured I would share my story with you, one of my mini match stories. So story time. I was a broke medical student, like most medical students are, unless I guess you're an influencer. And I was living in DC, and I needed to, find some way to save money. Some of my early interviews, I think up to Pittsburgh, I took the Megabus. I assume Megabus is still a thing, but you can get like $8, $9 bus tickets. And I think one of my first interviews, I took the Megabus from DC up to Pittsburgh, interviewed there, and then took the Megabus back. So adventure saved me some money. Occasionally, these programs would put you up in a hotel room. If it was a nice program, they would pay for your hotel. Otherwise, you're couch surfing. There's even a website, I think, Couch Surf, and Airbnb was just starting to become a thing back then. So I was doing whatever I could do to save money on my interviews. And I was able to line up quite a few interviews. I had an interview at Ohio State, I had 2 interviews in Chicago, and an interview in Philadelphia. So I started driving on a Wednesday to Columbus, Ohio. So I had my Ohio State interview. I drove out on Wednesday. The interview was Thursday. And then I had 2 interviews in Chicago that following day, that Friday and that Saturday. So I drove into Columbus. Ohio State University was kind enough to have this really nice hotel, and they comped us a night in the hotel. I think it's where like the Buckeyes stay, or I guess not the Buckeyes because that's to be their home stadium. I guess, visiting teams would come and stay. It was a really nice hotel on the campus there. So I show up, change, go to the interview dinner because they would have in-person interview dinners. Imagine that back then. So that was, Wednesday I get there, change, go to the interview dinner. Now, Thursday, I get up and, get dressed in the interview clothes, and I go down and start the day of interviews. Interviews would start around, 8 o'clock in the morning, and then they'd finish at some random time. Fortunately for me, my interview ended kind of early in the afternoon because I had to get to Chicago after that interview because I interviewed dinner that night. I had a good friend, Javi. We got into grad school together. He was at Ohio State for medical school, I think, or he was doing an away rotation or something. And I just remember I finished up the interview, which was my worst interview of residency applications. I could tell that story maybe at the end of this episode. It was pretty traumatizing. I don't know. Maybe it'll help you relate to whatever you're going through. So I remember finishing up this interview, and I went and found my buddy Javi. He was like, I think he was doing an away rotation in internal medicine, and we went and snapped a quick selfie. And that was all the time that I had. I went and jumped in my car, and I hit the road for Chicago. Now I'm driving because I had to make the interview dinner for the University of Chicago residency program. This is Thursday night now, right? Because I got to Columbus, Ohio on Wednesday, interview dinner Wednesday night, Ohio State interview Thursday. Thursday night was me heading to Chicago to get to an interview dinner. And the only reason I made it was because I kind of miscalculated the time difference. And I think I gained an hour going, or lost an hour, however that works. Because I remember I was stuck in Chicago traffic. It was rush hour. I had to get to this restaurant. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was Cafe Barbariba. One of the reasons to this day I hate tapas. But I remember changing out of my suit in my car while I was in traffic heading into Chicago. And I got to this restaurant, and it's kind of a big open restaurant with a lot of like tables and booths. And it was a favorite place for programs to host their interview dinners. So I remember like, gaining all of my, excitement and like hyping myself up because I got to, put on my best impression and meet the residents at this interview dinner. So I walk up to this table. I'm like, hey, I'm Steven. I'm a medical student from, Howard University. I'm here for the anesthesia residency pre-interview dinner. And like, they just stare at me and they're like, oh, we're like rush radiology. I'm like, oh man. Okay. Mind you, I'm tired because I just drove all the way from Columbus. So then I go to the next table and I psych myself up. I'm like, all right, be energetic, be friendly. I'm like, hey, I'm Steven. I'm from Howard and I'm here for the anesthesia residency interview dinner. And they're like, oh, we're Northwestern OB. Oh my God. So I went to like 3 or 4 different tables, and finally I found the University of Chicago table. Now I was kind of in the middle of dinner, and it was tapas. So I remember the only thing on the table was like some cold cuts and some olives. And that's what I had to like just tear up, even though I don't really like olives. And so I had to pretend I wasn't starving and eat that, and then kind of parlay with the folks at the table. So I did that. And then I had some friends, because there weren't any hotel rooms comped for these programs. So I had a friend that stayed in Chicago, quote unquote. I was like, cool, I'll couch surf. Well, I didn't, when people say they stay in a city, I usually assume like, okay, you're staying in the city. Well, no, the friend stayed like 30, 35 minutes out in the suburbs. So after dinner, I had to drive north to my friend's place. And it was a friend from college. So we hung out on the couch. We had to catch up a little bit and didn't get to bed till late. So now I got to get up in the morning because it's a good 50-minute drive back down to the south side of Chicago to get to the University of Chicago. So I'm exhausted, but I hit the road, everything's packed up in the car, and I drive down south, go to my University of Chicago interview. Interview was good, and right after the interview, I had about a couple hours of free time, and then I had to get to another interview dinner for a different program. This program was famous because they would always take you to a steakhouse. You can get like the filet mignon. It was legendary. So I went around, looked at the bean, and then changed, and then went to this interview dinner. Great. We had the steak. Now staying with a different friend because the first friend was unavailable. This friend stayed up north again. So I had to go 45 minutes north, crash with his friend. Great, free night stay, and then drive back. Now this is, that was Friday night that dinner was. So Saturday morning, get up, come into the city for my final residency interview in Chicago. This program, usually there'd be like cantaloupe or some bagels, some coffee. This program kind of spent all their money, I guess, on the steak dinner. So I'm starving because I didn't eat dinner, or eat breakfast rather. And now I show up and there's like no food at this interview. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm ready to leave right now. Now, finished that interview, and I'd met a friend at a previous interview, and she's a good friend to this day. And she always had a way of being like very persuasive. She's like, oh, why don't you like hang out? We met some other friends from a local program, and we were going to party in Chicago. I'm like, well, I don't have a place to stay. And she's like, oh, well, you can stay at this guy's house. Mind you, like I didn't know this guy. She didn't know this guy. She just met him, but she was like, oh yeah, you can stay at this guy's house. I'm like, okay, we'll see how it goes. So that Saturday night, we end up going out. And at first I was like, hey, do you mind if I stay at your place? And he looked at me like, dude, I don't even know who you are. No, that's kind of a weird question to ask. And my friend looked at her. She was like, oh yeah, just, see how it goes. So we ended up going out, partied till late. And now this guy was like drunk. And I was like, oh, hey, dude, do you mind if I crash on your couch? And he's like, oh, no, it's fine. It's cool. All right. So now I got a place to stay. Mind you, I figured this out at like 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night. So about 11 o'clock, I'm like, all right, I'm going to tap out. I followed some friends back to this guy's spot. That's where we pre-gamed at. And I just pass out on the couch. Now at 1 o'clock in the morning, I wake up because the party's moved back to the place. There's like, they're doing snow off of the countertops. It's just madness and debauchery. I'm like, okay, what did I get myself into? Mind you, I like parked my car in downtown Chicago and was worried about parking tickets and whatever. So I wake up the next morning because I got to hit the road. I'm going from Chicago to Philadelphia because I have an interview at Temple on Monday, right? This is Saturday night going into Sunday. So Sunday morning, I wake up, I'm at this guy's place. The apartment was trashed. I was like, okay, the least I can do is like, I guess, clean up his kitchen as a way of saying thank you. So I kind of like cleaned up his kitchen. Somebody woke up and like, dude, who are you? I'm like, oh yeah, I just crashed here for the night. Like whatever. So I cleaned up his kitchen countertops and then I hit the road, drove from Chicago, got into Temple, crashed on another friend's couch, went to the Temple interview, and then finally headed home to DC on that Monday. So that was like one of the roughest stretches of interviews, but it's all the things you can do when you're a broke medical student. I don't know if it's better, worse, or the same these days with virtual interviews. I know it's at the very least it's extremely, extremely different. So just know that, it's a tough stretch that you're in, but you did the work to get to this point, and, everything's going to work out in the end. The end. And I guess I'm in a storytelling mood. So going back to the worst interview that I had for all of residency. So this starts when I was in the ICU because I wanted to become an ICU physician and I wanted to do anesthesia. So as a senior medical student at Howard, I picked up was it a month or 2 months? I think it was a month-long rotation in the surgical ICU. And I scheduled this rotation for like the month right before I took step 2 CK. I had advisors, people that said, hey, Steven, that's not a good idea. You shouldn't do this. And I'm a little hard-headed, and I also have to like prove things to myself. So I didn't really listen to advisors or senior classmates or my fellow classmates or the resident. I didn't listen to anybody. I was like, whatever. I'll figure it out. I'll study, whatever. And I just jumped headfirst into ICU. I loved it, was working hard, was hitting like 84-hour weeks. And I felt great, like working with Dr. Green, Dr. Cornwell. I felt like, got to the point where they trusted me in the ICU. I would know patients just as well as the residents. Every now and then I'd be able to round with the attending and give them updates. And it was just a fantastic rotation. Now, my step 2 studying, on the other hand, took a hit. And not surprisingly, I did not do well on my step 2 compared to my step 1 score, which was like kind of right below the average for matching into anesthesia. My step 2 score was pretty bad. So I took it, at the point where the scores didn't really come back until late in the interview season. I just kind of skated by at a bunch of the initial interviews. Well, this all changed when I got to this one particular program, and I was sitting across from an attending who shared my complexion. I was like, this person is an ally, and we'll kind of, but you got to kind of fill them out, right? Because all skin folk ain't kinfolk. So I remember talking, that pre-interview, like kind of chit-chatting back and forth. And I was like, oh, how's the diversity at the program here? And this person starts talking about like Appalachian people. I was like, I don't know what that means. And I always look up their CV. This is a tip. I don't know, a pearl. I probably should have highlighted this earlier in the episode. When you're on interviews, one of the things I always do, whether it's, the day of or while you're sitting there drinking coffee, whatever, you should have a list of the people that you're going to interview with. Some programs will email it to you ahead of time or whatever, but I always go through and look and see, what they're about. Is there some research interest, or what papers are they publishing? What are they interested in? Because it gives you fuel to talk with this interviewer. So I looked at this person's interview, or in this person's bio, and there was like no HBCU on there. It was all PWIs. No offense to the PWIs. But then now they're talking about Appalachian people. I'm like, oh my God, I'm stuck. We're going to have to get through this one. So then it gets worse. So we're talking, we're parlaying, everything's going fine. And they're like, oh, hey, I noticed you didn't have a step 2 CK score. Did you take the test yet? I'm like, oh, here we go. Yeah, actually, I did take the test. Oh, what was your score? And I was like, well, it was a 215. And I don't know what like the average score is now, but back in my day, that wasn't like the best score. Like, I didn't fail it, but it wasn't going to help me get into any kind of program. So it's like, yeah, I got a 215. And there's just this awkward pause. And they're like, 215? I'm like, yeah, it was a 215. And then another like just awkward pause as they're just staring at their paper. And they said, I noticed that's quite a bit lower than your step 1 score. And I'm thinking like, obviously. And, what happened? And then I'm like, yeah, well, I was in the surgical ICU and I didn't have a lot of time to study and yada, yada. And it was just like okay. And then we like moved on. And man, when I tell you, I felt like I'd just been sucker punched. I had to like just hold it together. Like all the wind had been knocked out of me. I couldn't think clearly. I remember like stumbling out of the interview room and then going back to like that safe haven where the conference room table is, and everybody's sitting there eating cantaloupe and eating the bagel and drinking the coffee. And I just looked around like, I just want to leave right now. Everybody's just laughing and kicking and having a good time. And I'm just like, oh my God, I can't be here. I don't deserve to be here. It's ridiculous. And then ironically, I sat down with the chair of that program, and this person also brought up, what's your step 2 CK? And I told him, and then this person was like, oh, did anybody else ask you about this on the interview? And I was like, yeah, so-and-so did. And he actually kind of like apologized and like made me feel a little better. But that was like one of the worst interviews I've ever experienced. Needless to say, I did not match. Actually, this program reached out at one point to offer like a second look. And I was just like, no, absolutely not. I can't even think about going back there. So it was actually a really good, program, but just wasn't a good fit for me. So let's say, hang in there, you'll get through it. If you're feeling down, need somebody to talk to somebody, a friend, trusted advisor, whatever, they can help you get through. That's pretty much it for today's episode. I had a really busy week. This past week, I was in Chicago. We had an ethics conference I was able to attend. The McLean Center at University of Chicago, always a great time. And we had some awesome discussions about ethics of artificial intelligence, some great panels on that. I got to see a bunch of friends from residency, but I am absolutely exhausted. I'm in the ICU this week, so just recording this after I got off. And, but thanks for tuning in every week, and excited for some episodes we have coming up. Definitely some partnerships in the future with the Student National Medical Association. Registration is now open for the conference, which is going to be this spring. The annual medical education conference is phenomenal. You don't want to miss it. It's their 60th year anniversary. So we're excited to see the programming there, to hear about all the things that this program has done to increase diversity in medicine. You'll definitely be hearing more from this show about SNMA. So super excited for what's to come in our partnership with them. If you haven't already, check out their website. You can go, you can sign in, you can register for the conference. Thanks for tuning in to the Black Doctors Podcast. I am Steven, your host. Tune in every Monday for a new episode. We are here because representation matters.